Well, the truth finally comes out. Well, not really, because the truth essentially came out earlier, but not quite in as much detail because, again, the matter of the fact is that no matter what anybody says, no matter what circumstances are involved in the development of a certain situation, we as Americans are only going to gravitate to what stirs the most emotion. We're not going to be concerned about facts, evidence, circumstances, perspectives, points of view, things of this sort. We're just so high strung on emotionalism that all that matters is just whatever causes us to become indignant over whatever. And I guess that's kind of what this social networking thing has done with these little social media groups and these video sites and what all. They're just breeding grounds to satisfy that urge among us to just get emotional, to experience all kinds of drama, and I just don't know. It's just boggling my mind. But I wanted to do a follow-up on this, mainly because I found essentially what I was hoping to have come across much earlier when I was first commenting on this whole thing and speculating as to what actually was involved with this whole Janay and Ray Rice thing. And, I hate to keep beating this dead horse, but everything eventually just manifested into, as I pretty much just basically laid it out. As I tried to explain, it's like, look, take emotionalism out of it, look at things objectively and in a certain frame of mind, and try to glean the facts away from all this hyper-emotionalism and come to a truer, more correct perspective of the thing that was involved and the circumstances which led up to the final outcome. And as I tried to explain in my initial thing, was that, look, we had a situation where we've been so conditioned and so brainwashed to believe that there's absolutely never any time that a woman should ever be slapped, smacked, punched, whatever. And as terrible a thing as it is, I tried to make the point that, look, there are circumstances which will eventually or have the great potential to actually lead to a violent response, and it's not always just a nasty, mean, vicious brute of a man just taking out his frustrations on an innocent, defenseless, poor little innocent flower just because she has a vagina. You have to look at the fact that partner violence, this so-called domestic violence nonsense, is often a two-way street. And I tried to point that out with my initial assessment of the whole, the damning video, the damning evidence which saw that Ray Rice is just a monster and he should be barred from the National Football League in perpetuity because he's just another example of a vile, vicious monster. And of course, this damn James Brown news commentator or sportscaster or whoever the heck he was. I still don't know who he is, and I don't care to know who he was. But doing that same old Captain Save-A-Hole similitude stuff, trying to make it seem like women are always the innocent victims, they absolutely never do anything to contribute to them getting smacked around or whatever. Again, like I said, that's in my idea not a solution to a problem. But if you're going to put yourself in a situation where that's the response you get, then I'm sorry, I'm not going to shed a tear for you. And I tried to explain this, and Pentazoid called me out on it and said, hey, you didn't really look carefully at that whole video like you said you did. You would have saw that Ray Rice actually spit upon her before she slapped him. So they're, trying to justify a woman slapping a man around, and I guess, supposed to be getting away with it because she's a girl, don't you know? And women are always supposed to get away with hitting a man. And I reviewed the thing again, and I looked at it like, yeah, it would appear that Ray Rice had spit upon her. But I expressed serious skepticism about that whole thing because, as I explained in my what was actually a preamble to what was my actual follow-up video to the first one that I had posted, I stated plainly and clearly that, look, normal human response and normal human reaction to being spit upon is to just automatically, instinctively wipe off what was ever projected upon you. And the only time that you never see that happen is in the movies. So the fact that she never reached up instinctively to wipe, and even if it wasn't instinctive, the fact that she just didn't reach up and try to wipe anything off of her at all indicated to me the strong suspicion that he did not actually spit on her. That in my mind, in actuality, it was more akin to when somebody thrusts a fist toward your face but doesn't actually connect. You know, they're actually wanting to get some kind of a reaction from you to let you know that they're really not feeling in the best of moods toward you right at that moment. But again, if Boyd did really spit upon this woman, bad call on him. But it was an even worse call on her to respond with a physical slap. But regardless of that situation, I explained to Pendazoid and anybody who cared to listen, it's like, look, don't pinpoint that as the genesis of the violent and tragic end. Because as I explained, if Boyd really did spit upon her, or even if it was just an aspiration, a mocking of spitting on her just to let her know that he wasn't satisfied with her for some odd reason, I stated clearly that that was not the start of the conflict. Even though that's the earliest point that we saw from the elevator lobby as to what took place there, and supposedly he started it by spitting upon her, I said no, that was not the starting point. That was not the genesis of this whole thing. Something happened prior to them coming within camera range that built itself up to the point to where he felt he had to respond that way. As wrong and as improper as it was, but he was expressing his frustration and his dissatisfaction and his annoyance at her. And it was at that point that we saw for ourselves the starting point of what eventually came to be the knocking out blow, which again, as I explained, it was not the punch that knocked her out, it was her going down and hitting her head on the rail inside the elevator, which is what actually knocked her out. But I said, we have to backtrack before even that first moment that they appeared in camera. Something else was going on in order to lead to all of this conflict. And I said, until we get camera footage from somewhere else in the lobby prior to them coming into that camera frame in the elevator lobby, we're not really going to know the whole story. Well, now we know the whole story because it came straight out of Janay Rice's mouth, which she pretty much attested to vaguely during those press conferences that they had together, where she came right out and apologized for, quote, her role, unquote, in the whole situation, saying that she was responsible for some of the things that led up to that ultimate ending. But nobody wanted to listen to her because you got to remember, you're a woman, you're a female, and you're always a perpetual victim. You can never take responsibility or accountability for anything that a man does to you because you're always innocent, you're always the victim, and that whole man always bad, woman always good, man always evil and vicious and mean, women always victim and demure and timid and all this other nonsense. If you have a vagina, you can do no wrong. So anytime anything bad happens to you, it's always somebody else's fault. And of course, by somebody else, I mean something with a penis. And I so wish that I had this earlier that I could have referred back to it. But here it is. I just pulled this up just yesterday. Well, by the time I get this posted, it would have been 2 days ago. But unfortunately, it happened to have the date of December 1st. So almost an entire month had passed before I came across this article, written in some online news magazine called celebmusic247.com. I don't know who these people are, never heard of them, but I came across this article and it is not attributed to anyone. There's no credit byline or anything that says who actually wrote this article. But when I read through this thing, it's going to tell you something either about the person who wrote this article or the editor who came in after the article had been submitted and decided to doctor what the article was trying to express in order to fit, most likely, her rotten crotch feminist agenda. So somehow, a nasty, vicious, evil, man-hating shrew was responsible for how this article eventually turned out, because it started off exactly the way it should have started out. Headline of this article, quote, Janay Rice recalls what really happened, unquote. After the video surfaced, Janay made it clear on Instagram that she felt the backlash was unwarranted now that Ray was able to convince the arbiter to overturn his indefinite suspension by the NFL for hitting his then fiancée and now wife in a hotel elevator, freeing him to play again on Friday. While Rice is ready to get back on the field, his wife is still on the Clean Up His Image campaign, speaking on the incident in the elevator in a new interview with ESPN's Jamie Hall, or Jamel Hall, I'm sorry. Wait, how do you spell it? Jamele, Jamil Hall, Jamel Hall. I don't know. I don't care. I don't know these people. I don't like sports anyway, so I don't know who any of these people are. So whoever that guy or gal is, I don't know. But anyway, let me continue reading. Janay explains, quote, as we were arguing, you get that? As we were arguing, he was on the phone and not looking at me. Oh, boo-hoo-hoo. There we go. Shed a tear. Attention whore drama queens all around, just like a typical woman who's indignant about getting, they want to start arguments or they want to get into an argument, and the first thing you want to do is like, pay attention to me, you're not listening, but you're not listening. One of the things that used to infuriate my ex-wife to no end was the fact is when she started running her mouth and she wanted to start getting all hot and testy and confrontational whatnot, I'd just clam up and I'd just look the other way. That made her light years more angry. Simple fact that I would not entertain all of her vitriolic spewing of, whatever it was that she felt like she needed to get off her chest at the time. I didn't want to deal with it. I didn't want to be bothered with it. And I just said, nope, I'm turning off. I've got nothing to say. I'm not getting into a fight with you. They say hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. Try hell hath no fury like an argumentative woman who you're not paying attention to, who you're not giving your full ear to. You'll see the real nasty side of a bitter, confrontational woman then. And here was Janay admitting that this is exactly who and what she was. Someone who was not content to spew her indignation for whatever they were arguing about. Apparently she didn't go into that, or if she did it on that television interview, which I never saw. I'm assuming it's a television interview. ESPN, it could have been their website, it could have been their Again, as I said, I don't know, I don't keep up with this mess. I'm just going by what I'm reading here. So she was arguing with him about something. Now, whether they were arguing back and forth, that's not clear either. Because in her mind, she says, we were arguing while he was on the phone. So, again, that causes me to suspect that she was just arguing at him. And the fact that he wasn't looking at her and just continuing to talk on the phone and not entertaining her, that lets it be known to me that about a good 85% of a possibility that she was just yelling at him and that he was trying not to engage with her. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but that's what it suspiciously sounds like. But she's upset that he's not paying her any attention because she wants to argue and he wants to go about his business and not deal with her little histrionic moment. And so she goes on to say, quote, I went to reach for his phone, and when he grabbed it back, he spit at me, and I slapped him, unquote. So again, whose fault was this that she got knocked out? Looks to me like she's admitting that it was her fault. Why? Because she wanted to argue. He didn't want to argue. She took away the barrier that stood between her arguing with him and him dealing with the blunt and force of her argument, which was him talking on his cell phone. He determined, no, you're not going to command my attention like that. Give me my phone back, snatches it back from her. And as I explained, the worst thing you can do with an argumentative woman is to refuse to argue with her. And so by refusing to argue with her, by snatching the phone back out of her hand, she decides, well, I'll get your attention, and she slaps him. And that was the slap that we saw in the elevator lobby before they got in the elevator. Okay, admittedly, after he supposedly spit upon her, which again, I suspect did not really happen. But even if it did happen, hey, how about this? You don't touch the man in a disagreeable way. And by yanking the phone out of his hand, you set yourself up for a less than friendly response. So if he spit upon her, she called for that, which is essentially what she admits to. Again, I'm not saying it was the right move, but I'm saying when you put yourself in a situation where it's going to result in some kind of a negative reaction, don't be surprised that you receive a negative reaction because you want to throw a tantrum. So here we continue, quote, "We got into the elevator, and what happened inside is still foggy to me. The only thing I know, and I can't even say I remember because I only know from what Ray has told me, is that I slapped him again and then he hit me," close quote, which was confirmed by the video, which everybody has to go making comments on and talking about. He knocked her out, he punched her down, and he beat her like Ali beating up Joe Frazier. Hey, did we see the part even from inside the elevator where she smacked him, he shoved her back away from him, she got up in his face again, and that's when he decked her. Oh, everybody wants to forget that part. Everybody wants to pretend that they didn't see that part. But even by her own admission, it's like, I can't really recall what happened. I can only go by what Ray told me, which was confirmed by the video. He did not lie. Exactly what he said happened in the elevator was exactly what we saw for ourselves with our own, I suppose, lying eyes. Because all we were supposed to have seen was Ray knock her out. That's all we were supposed to have seen. But I guess our eyes are lying to us that she jumped up in his face, smacked him. He pushes her away from her to get her off of him. She jumps up in his face again like she wants to continue to throw down with him. That's the part we're not supposed to see. That was an optical illusion. That didn't really happen. F out of here. So here's what Janay had to say about that. Quote, "The video did not make me rethink our relationship, but I did want more of an explanation from him. I asked him why he left me on the floor like that. I asked him how he felt when he saw that I was unconscious, and he told me he was in shock," unquote. Reading further says, quote, "We were married March 28th, the day after he was indicted for aggravated assault. We did not choose that day because of the incident. It just happened to be a Friday and a time when our family could attend our wedding without having to interrupt their work schedules. I didn't understand why that was suspicious to some people. We had been together 7 years and had been engaged for 2. What happened that night was not going to change the fact that we were going to get married," unquote. Next sentence says, Janay also says she made a public apology because she feels she was wrong too. Quote, "Looking out over the media, I became angry seeing all the people who had been covering this and adding to the story. I wanted to tell everyone what was really on my mind. When it was my turn to speak, I said I regretted my role in the incident. I know some people disagreed with me publicly apologizing. I'm not saying that what Ray did wasn't wrong. He and I both know it was wrong. It's been made clear to him that it was wrong. But at the same time, who am I to put my hands on somebody? I had already apologized to Ray, and I felt that I should take responsibility for what I did." Unquote. So did you hear that? Did you hear the admission? Did you hear a woman taking responsibility for her own actions? The next sentence goes on to say, Janay is not comfortable being labeled a victim of domestic violence. Quote, "I still find it hard to accept being called a victim. I know that there are so many different opinions out there about me, that I'm weak, that I'm making excuses and covering up abuse, and that some people question my motives for staying with Ray," unquote. Janay states that she is not a victim because the elevator attack was the first time Ray had ever assaulted her, unquote. Now I'm going to stop it right there and say, first time, if you forgive that first time, you better make damn sure it's the only time. That's all I've got to say about that. But this whole situation went down based upon something that I suspect, which I have no information on, but I strongly suspect that this conflict got brewed up between the two of them because, again, I'm only speculating and I'm only positing a theory here based on no evidence other than my own speculative imagination. But I suspect that the way everything went down, liquor was somehow involved. I'm almost willing to bet that both of them had been drinking before this whole incident occurred. That's just my suspicion. That's just my speculation. I don't know. I haven't heard anything. There's no information out there. I'm just saying that if we were to dig deeper, I'd say 70% certainty that was what was involved. And that's what helped contribute to this thing getting out of hand as it did. But regardless of that, did you hear a woman actually taking responsibility for her own actions, for her own roles, that she was owning up to what she had done to contribute to this whole thing, womaning up, in other words, not playing the victim card, saying that just because I'm a girl, I can do whatever I want to and nobody can lay a hand upon me? Did you see the definition, a true example of a strong black woman? There it is right there. Not that BS, my crap don't stink, I'm the backbone of the community, single mother, goddess of the universe, delusional BS crap that we always hear. But here you go, right here. A genuine example of a strong black woman. Someone who can take responsibility upon her own shoulders and will accept accountability for her own actions in life. But what do these rotten, fetid, crotchet feminists and their sick, twisted agenda have to say about a strong, responsible female like Janay Rice? Here you go, the closing sentence of this article, which is what pissed me the hell off. Because up to this point, the article was doing good and it was doing right, and it was telling the world what it needed to hear. Not what it wanted to hear, but what it needed to hear. But that's not good enough for an agenda fraud. Here you go. The sentence immediately following the last sentence that I read, where it says Janay states that she does not feel that she's a victim of domestic violence victim because that was the first time he had ever assaulted her. And of course, the correct answer is it should have been no time being assaulting her. But again, as I said, what led up to it? Well, she admitted what led up to it. She hit him first and second and got up in his face again as though she wanted to do it a third time. So she understands that she pretty much signed the waiver, so to speak. But here's what this rotten crotch sucker had to say in response to that last sentence. Quote, "Really? Isn't that what all domestic violence victims say? Here is just a few of the typical excuses which Janay just displayed in her interview. Like, oh, he didn't mean it. It was an accident. Or our favorite, he didn't mean it." You already said that, first of all, but then it goes on to say, is anyone believing her? Yes, someone's believing her. I'm believing her. Because what she's saying is the truth. And I always believe the truth. What I don't believe is this whole idea that no matter what somebody has to say in their own defense, even if it's unpopular, whoa, if it doesn't fit with our agenda, then we have to call them out as they're just being deceived and they're just being deluded and they're living in denial. I am so sick of this feminist claptrap garbage that let's just say that it's a good thing murder is illegal. You know, because if this were ever what was that movie? The Purge? If we were ever to have a society like that, I'm telling you, around me, all these pseudo-feminist frauds would start piling up immediately. Those would be among my first targets. Because they are so disingenuous and they are so determined to keep everybody at odds with one another And because of that, these neo-fascist neocons are able to run rampant and use their own little emotional spin to run their game on everybody else. So it's this feminized, man-hating agenda frauds that are essentially fueling that fire. Because in their mind, we have to do anything and everything that puts men in a bad light, even when it's women doing something that actually end up resulting in men's reaction that will end up putting them in a bad light. Even though what they do as men is wrong in situations like that, the other half who actually pushes them and goads them into those types of reactions are not allowed to be let off scot-free. And Janay Rice just came out and said, no, I don't get a free pass just because I have a vagina. In other words, a real woman, not a little child, not a helpless, innocent victim, but an adult who accepts adult responsibility. And so I tried to make a text comment where, of course, they're asking, submit your comment, here you put your name and the address and all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, I just decided I'll go ahead, I'll drop my comment. And turns out that this is one of those sites where when you drop a comment, your comment doesn't get posted immediately. So I'm assuming that it has to go through a filter before it actually gets posted. And being that that's the fact, I already pretty much determined that because of what I had to say, that comment is never going to get posted. And so because of that, I decided to save that comment, and I'm going to read it here verbatim as I submitted it. Quote, "Here I was, about ready to commend someone for finally writing a balanced article telling the complete story of the Janay and Ray Rice elevator incident and how it was not simply the case of a big brutish male beating up on an innocent and helpless female victim. And yet, despite all of her clear explanation about what had led to the incident, including openly and honestly admitting to her role in the whole lead-up to what eventually became another anti-male witch hunt, the writer of this article, or perhaps an editor who did not appreciate the balanced approach to the issue of intimate partner violence and decided to alter the text after the fact, had the audacity and gall to twist it all back around in yet another nasty attempt to brainwash the public into believing that there is no such thing as mutual domestic violence, despite the FBI's Bureau of Crime Statistics' own numbers, and that any and all women who own up to the fact that they themselves can and do engage in violent behavior against their male intimate partners are to be regarded as perpetual victims who are somehow living in denial, especially whenever their violent actions result in equally violent retaliation against them. This is yet another sickening example of a disingenuous agenda fraud at work, who surely will proclaim that women should be equal in all areas, except of course whenever it involves being held to equal accountability." Close quote. So there it all is in a nutshell. So who are you going to believe? Janay Rice, the grown-up adult woman who accepts personal responsibility for her own actions, who admits to her role in a situation which actually led to her being hurt and humiliated? Or are you going to believe these phony feminist frauds, these shrieking man-hating shrews, whose entire agenda is all about nothing but demonizing men and excusing women with carte blanche immunity? Who you gonna believe? I know who I believe. And I believe the real woman in this story. The grown-up, the adult, not some excuse-making, tantrum-throwing little child who feels entitled just because they have a hole between their legs. Wake the F up. End of line.